Now we're going to learn about do-while loops. Just like a while loop, do-whiles function exactly the same. The only difference is where we are performing the condition check to see if we should continue looping. In a while loop, there is no guarantee that our code in the loop is actually going to execute. And that is because the condition is checked first before the body of the loop is actually executed, which means if the condition is already set to false for some reason, in other words, something happened up here to change the condition to false, which means we really don't need to run this code, then what's going to happen is this code will never actually run. So let's run this really quick. As you can see, we get this line right here, which is in the normal flow of our program, but we never see this condition inside loop being printed out. And that's because the condition equated to false, therefore the body never runs. So there's no guarantee that with a while loop, your loop will ever actually run. It'll only run if this condition is true. And if it happens to be false at the beginning, that code never runs. Now, sometimes in programming, you might run into a condition where you need to guarantee that your loop will run at least once, and then the condition will be checked to see if we should loop again. And that's where a do-while loop comes in handy. With a do-while, all we're really doing is we're doing the do. This gives us the block of code that we want to run, so console.log, and then we're just going to say inside the loop. And then we have our while condition, just like in a while loop, with the condition right here. And the condition we're going to provide inside of this do-while loop is going to be the condition that determines whether or not the loop should be run any additional times. And that's because this code will execute at least once, because the condition is not checked until after the code block executes. So if we have a condition, so let condition equal false. So as we saw in our while loop, if it's false, this code is not going to run because this condition is checked prior to the block running, and therefore it never runs. But we do get what's at the end. So I'm going to copy this right here. We'll pull it over to our do while. And let's go ahead and do our check on our condition. Condition. It is false, just like we had it set in our while loop. Cool thing though is that because the condition check happens after the block, we are guaranteed this is going to run at least once. So let's go ahead and run this code and see what happens. Inside the loop, and then loop has ended, we are now running normal code. So here we see, even though the condition is false, which would tell the while loop not to execute the code, it does happen at least once. And then the condition is checked, it's false, so then we continue on to our regular code. Just like anything else, the condition at some point needs to be altered. So somewhere inside of your do while, inside of your do block, you need to change the condition to avoid any type of infinite loop. Right? We want to avoid infinite loops. So you're going to make sure that at some point in here, this condition changes to true due to something that happened during the processing so that you can break out of this loop and it will not be infinite. So really, that's the only difference between a while loop and a do while, is just that this block of code is guaranteed to execute at least once. And then it can execute more than once so long as this condition is true, as we'll see here. So let's go ahead and set this to true. This will break us into an infinite loop because we don't have anything changing the condition. So let's stop the infinite loop. And then down here, let's say inside of our do while, we've got some kind of counter doing something, and it checks a bunch of stuff. And then actually we'll need the counter outside the loop because otherwise it's just going to reset it to 0 all the time. But inside of our loop, we've got something that happens, and it affects the counter. So we got a counter plus plus. And then at some point we want to change the condition. So if counter equals 5, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to change the condition to false. And so this thing should run, let's see, if we start at 0 and we're going all the way to 5, I'm guessing we should see this about 6 times. So let's go ahead and start the debug. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We saw it 5 times. Oh, and that's because we're incrementing the counter before we actually get to this. So it did only run 5 times, not 6 times. And that's the reason why my assumption was incorrect, is because like a for loop, the counter gets incremented after. So if we go ahead and run it now we should see it 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. So it's just a matter of where we did the incrementing of the counter. And being that I only wanted it to go 5 times, having that counter above moved it from a 0 to a 1, and then it only went 5 times. So again, just like a while loop, you need to make sure that you're in control of, number one, what your condition is, how you are changing your condition, and then making sure that condition gets changed at some point within the block of the do. That way, when the while checks the condition, at some point it'll equate to false, so you can move on with your code and you don't end up with an infinite loop.